The night before my sister's wedding, I went to bed in the guest room of my parents' house with a strange, uneasy peace in my chest. The house smelled like roses and champagne. Downstairs, I could still hear laughter echoing from the kitchen, my father's booming voice, my mother's shrill rehearsed giggle, and my sister, Clara's sweet melodic laugh that used to make me feel like a child left outside in the rain. I had spent 2 exhausting weeks helping her plan this wedding. I steamed her veil, ironed her napkins, stayed up late, labeling place cards while she practiced her vows in front of the mirror. I had even sewn the hem of her rehearsal dress while she criticized the color of my lipstick. I told myself it was fine. I wasn't invited to give a toast. I wasn't even seated near the family table. But I told myself I was happy just to be there, that this was what being a good daughter meant, being useful. By midnight, the laughter faded. I turned off the lamp and stared at the ceiling, tracing cracks I'd memorized since high school. It was my old room, stripped of everything personal. The posters were gone. The shelves were bare. The only thing left was the faint indent of where my bed used to be. I closed my eyes. When I woke, it was to the sound of something breaking glass, sharp and close. I opened my mouth to ask if anyone was hurt, but the only sound that came out was a gasp because pain bloomed across my cheek like fire. I couldn't move. My vision blurred. The taste of metal filled my mouth. A second impact landed across my jaw. Then something wet and warm slid down my neck. I forced my eyes open. In the dim light spilling from the hallway, I saw them, my parents, standing over me. My mother's face was cold, surgical. My father's hand was clenched around one of the silver centerpieces from Clara's rehearsal dinner shards glittering at the base. My mother's voice sliced through the silence. "Serves you right for trying to upstage your sister." I blinked, dizzy. "What?" My voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" My father gave a small, disgusted laugh, the same sound he used when I tripped over my words as a child. "You should have stayed invisible, Naomi. But no, you had to wear makeup. You had to stand near the groom's mother. You always need attention." I tried to sit up. My head spun. The sheet was soaked beneath my face. My mother reached out her fingers, trembling not from fear, but fury. "Let's see them take pictures of that face tomorrow," she hissed. My father raised his glass still half full from the leftover champagne and said calmly, "To peace and perfection." Then they clinked glasses above me, the crystal catching the hallway light, scattering it across the walls like little knives. For a moment, everything went quiet except the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady drip of blood from my chin to the carpet. I realized then that the sound of glass breaking hadn't been an accident. It had been the beginning. I crawled toward the corner, the world tilting my pulse loud in my ears. My mother didn't move to help me. My father turned away as if I were a stain he didn't want to see. I pressed my hand to my face and felt the sticky warmth of blood between my fingers. No tears came. Just a strange, hollow calm, the kind of calm that feels like the moment before lightning strikes. Morning came with the sound of clinking dishes and laughter downstairs. Sunlight pressed through the thin curtains, slicing across the bruises that had bloomed overnight. My face throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. When I tried to sit up, a flash of white pain shot through my cheek and jaw. I shuffled into the bathroom, turned on the light, and froze. The mirror didn't show a person, it showed a ruin. My right eye was swollen, my lip split, and a jagged red welt curved from my temple to the edge of my mouth. I looked like I had been mugged in an alley. I reached for a towel and dabbed at the blood, but it only smeared dark and thick. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I stared at the mirror until my reflection blurred into something unrecognizable. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I heard my mother's voice before I saw her. "Naomi, are you awake?" Her tone was honey over glass, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. She turned the corner, took one look at me, and let out a rehearsed gasp. "What happened to your face?" she said loudly, like an actress hitting her mark. My father appeared behind her, holding his coffee. He didn't even blink. "Maybe she fell again," he said, taking a sip. "Clumsy as always." My mother nodded, already spinning her lie. "You should have been more careful walking in the dark, sweetheart. The carpet is uneven near the stairs." She didn't even look at the stairs. She looked at me, eyes narrowed, daring me to contradict her. My voice was small, raw. You hit me. The air seemed to freeze for a second. Then my father laughed a deep, amused laugh that filled the kitchen. You hear that, Elaine? We hit her. Good imagination. Maybe she bumped her head harder than we thought. My mother's eyes turned to ice. Don't make this worse than it already is. You'll ruin Clara's big day. She walked closer, the smell of her expensive perfume pushing into my lungs. You want to ruin your sister's wedding, is that it? I shook my head dizzy, the motion sending a streak of pain across my face. No. Then cover it up. She reached into her purse, pulled out a stick of concealer, and shoved it into my palm. You'll wear the gray dress we picked. You'll smile when the photographer points the camera. You will not talk about this to anyone. My father leaned against the counter, smirking. Maybe she should wear sunglasses. Wouldn't want people thinking the maid of honor got into a bar fight. I'm not the maid of honor, I said quietly. Exactly, my mother snapped. So, don't act like one. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. Clara entered, then, still in her satin robe, her hair curled perfectly. When she saw me, her jaw dropped. Oh my God! What happened to your face? Before I could answer, my mother interjected smoothly. She tripped in the dark. Always so clumsy. Clara's eyes flicked between us, suspicion flickering for half a heartbeat, then fading into indifference. Well, you can't be in the photos looking like that. Maybe stay in the back row. Her tone was flat annoyed, as if I had spilled wine on her dress. I wanted to scream that they had done this to me, that every mark on my face was their doing. But my father's eyes met mine, and I saw the warning there, cold, absolute. He didn't need to say the words, "No one will believe you." They had been rehearsing this script my whole life. I thought of the last time I told a teacher about the bruises on my arms in high school, how my mother arrived crying, clutching fake hospital forms, how the principal apologized to her, how my father grounded me for lying. I remembered the years after college when I worked 2 jobs while they drained my savings to pay Clara's tuition, the quiet rewriting of history every time I tried to speak. You always exaggerate, my mother had said. You always make us look bad. Now, as she brushed imaginary dust off my shoulder, the pattern felt complete. You should be grateful you're even invited, she said softly. Don't make us regret it. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I needed her to leave. When they finally walked out, the house felt too quiet, like the silence after a storm. I stared at the concealer in my hand. The color was 2 shades too light, too pale to ever hide what they'd done. But I opened it anyway, because in this house, truth was always covered in makeup. By the time I stepped out of the car at the lakeside venue, my face felt like it had been replaced by someone else's. The concealer cracked around the edges of the wound above my eyebrow. I had wrapped a silk scarf around my neck and jaw, pretending it was for style. The October wind bit at my skin cold and sharp, but I barely felt it. Inside, the hall glowed with chandeliers and white roses. Every surface shimmered the kind of beauty my mother worshipped, the kind that hid rot beneath it. As I walked through the entrance, conversations dipped. People stared for half a second too long, then turned away quickly like I was contagious. I caught a reflection of myself in the glass door, pale, swollen, silent. My mother was already playing hostess hugging guests and gesturing toward Clara like a queen presenting her heir. My father was at the bar, slapping backs, charming business partners who had no idea their donations funded fake charities. Clara stood near the altar in a designer gown, radiant, glowing, untouchable. When she saw me, her smile flickered for a heartbeat. "Oh, Naomi," she murmured, pulling me aside. "You should have just stayed home if you were feeling unwell." I swallowed hard. I wanted to be here. She sighed dramatically. "Fine, but maybe stay in the back, all right. You'll throw off the aesthetic." The words hit like a small, clean slap. I nodded. The ceremony began. I sat in the last pew, hidden behind a pillar, clutching the program until my knuckles went white. When Clara walked down the aisle on Dad's arm, the guests gasped. She looked like perfection sculpted out of privilege. My mother dabbed her eyes delicately, pretending to cry. From my seat, I could see the bruises under my makeup reflected faintly in the polished floor, ghostly purple against gold light. During the vows, my mother leaned back and hissed, "Smile. Don't look miserable." I forced the corners of my mouth upward. The motion tugged at the split on my lip, reopening it just enough for a drop of blood to mix with the lipstick. Dad turned halfway toward me, grinning as if to remind me who had won. "She's lucky we even let you attend," he whispered. That was when something inside me shifted. Not broke, cracked. Thin and sharp, the kind of crack you hear before glass shatters. After the ceremony, the photographer lined everyone up near the lake for family portraits. Naomi, maybe a bit further back, Mom called out, "You'll look better in the shadows." The guests laughed lightly, thinking it was a joke. I stepped backward until my heels sank into the damp grass. The cold air stung my face, and I felt strangely steady. Every humiliation, every lie, every bruise, they weren't breaking me. They were carving me into something sharper. At the reception, the laughter swelled again. Champagne poured endlessly. Clara danced with her new husband under strings of white lights. My parents stood at the head table basking in borrowed glory. I hovered near the edge of the room, invisible. When the best man finished his toast, my father raised his glass, smiling toward the crowd. To family, he said, his eyes locking on mine. Even the ones who try their best not to ruin photos. The laughter that followed rolled through the room like a wave. I stood perfectly still, every muscle trembling from the effort not to react. My mother leaned toward a group of women and stage whispered, "She used to be so pretty before she stopped taking care of herself." Their giggles sliced through the noise. I turned toward the window and caught my reflection again. The dim lights turned the glass into a mirror of ghosts, my bruised face, my parents smiling behind me, Clara laughing, everyone clinking glasses. It looked perfect from the outside. Only I knew what it cost. I stepped outside for air, the night cold enough to sting my lungs. The music muffled behind the doors. I stared out at the black surface of the lake and thought of how many times I'd been told to disappear, to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. The wind caught the edge of my scarf, fluttering it like a flag of surrender. But it didn't feel like surrender anymore. It felt like warning. When I turned back, I saw them through the glass my family framed in light, all smiles and champagne. They looked untouchable. They believed this night sealed their perfection forever. They didn't know that this was the last night their world would stay intact. I pressed my fingers to the cool glass, feeling the pulse in my bruised skin and the faint hum of the music beneath it. I whispered to my reflection, "They built this on lies. I'll tear it down with truth." The glass fogged slightly where I spoke, then cleared. My reflection stared back steadier now. For the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a witness. That night, long after the music faded and the last of the guests stumbled out into the cold, I sat alone on the edge of the guest bed. My scarf lay on the floor, stained with concealer and blood. The laughter from downstairs seeped through the vents my parents, celebrating their victory. Clara's voice lilting above the hum of champagne. Every sound was a reminder that they had done it again. Rewritten reality sealed the lie, turned me invisible. I looked around the room, my old room stripped of everything I used to love. The walls were empty except for faint nail marks where my shelves had been. Even my high school trophies were gone, thrown away, or sold. All that remained was the old desk my father used to search through when I was at work, hunting for proof I wasn't as obedient as Clara. I opened the drawer and found an old external drive, the one I used during my first design job. I hadn't touched it in years. I plugged it into my laptop and waited for the faint click of connection. The screen filled with folders, old projects, scanned bills, photos. I scrolled my hand, trembling. Among them, a folder named Family. Inside were images from birthdays, vacations, graduations, all the moments that had once looked happy but weren't. In every one I could see it now, my mother's tight smile, my father's hand gripping too hard on my shoulder, Clara glowing in the center like a trophy. A strange calm settled over me. I started another folder and named it Evidence. The word looked heavy and right. One by one, I copied everything that mattered, the old texts from Mom asking for donations for Naomi's recovery fund, the charity invoices with forged signatures, the bank transfers from Dad's accounts labeled community support. All of it had been there hiding in plain sight, just like me. I remembered his words. You should have stayed invisible. Fine, let them think I was. I'd been invisible long enough to see everything they tried to hide. Downstairs, a cork popped. Laughter rose again, loud, false, triumphant. My reflection in the laptop screen stared back at me, half shadow, half light. I whispered to her, no more crying, no more begging. Evidence doesn't blink. For the first time, I felt steady. My face hurt, but the pain no longer scared me. It focused me. They thought they had silenced me with fear and shame. They didn't understand that silence could be sharper than any scream. Upstairs, I started typing. The house was asleep by midnight. The champagne glasses still littered the living room, catching the faint flicker of the fireplace. I could hear my father snore through the vent, steady and self-satisfied. My mother's heels had been abandoned by the door, one on its side like a casualty. From upstairs, I could smell her perfume, sharp and sweet, like spoiled fruit. I sat at the desk with the glow of the laptop painting my bruises pale blue. Every keystroke felt deliberate, surgical. This wasn't rage anymore. It was anatomy. I was dissecting the disease my family had built. I started with my mother. Her old Gmail password still worked. She'd never changed it. Inside her Helping Hands folder were hundreds of emails to church friends, relatives, and donors, all written in her soft, saintly tone. Please keep Naomi in your prayers, she had written. Her depression and health issues have made it impossible for her to work. Any small gift helps. Attached were photos of me, old ones she'd stolen from my Facebook, cropped and darkened to make me look frail. She had collected donations for years under my name. I read one message from my aunt in Arizona, sending 5 chauhans today. Poor thing. I swallowed hard. Poor thing. I moved those emails into a new folder, Fraud Mother. Then came my father's files. His desktop was open downstairs on the home office computer. I crept down the stairs, the wood groaning beneath each step. The glow from the monitor was faint enough to guide me. His email folders were worse than I expected, thousands of exchanges with local officials, contractors, and nonprofit boards. Hidden payments, fake receipts, donation kickbacks. He'd built his reputation on community charity, but the documents told another story. Bribes, laundering, influence. He used my mother's fake charity as the front. Every transfer carried her signature. I copied everything. Folder after folder, invoice after invoice. My fingers shook not from fear, but from something colder, clarity. Upstairs, I could hear Clara laughing in her sleep, a soft, drunk giggle. On her unlocked phone, I found the final crack in their perfection screenshots of her messages with the wedding planner. Naomi's so desperate for attention, she'd written. Tell the makeup artist to keep her neutral. No colors. I don't want her face distracting anyone. The planner had replied with a laughing emoji. My sister's replies got bolder after midnight. Photos from the bachelor party, not with her husband, but with the best man. He's more fun, she'd typed, followed by hearts. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just an eerie stillness, like standing at the edge of a frozen lake. I wasn't angry anymore. I was archiving truth. By 3 a.m., I had collected it all. Screenshots, PDF exports, camera photos of the house receipts that matched the fraudulent invoices. I titled each folder carefully. Mother fraud, father bribes, sister infidelity. Then I uploaded backups to a cloud drive under an alias I'd created years ago, Glass Witness. My reflection in the dark laptop screen looked back at me with half her face bruised, half her face lit by data. I whispered, they live for image. I'll let the image devour them. I drafted the emails next. The first to the local newspaper editor, subject line, documents regarding Carter family charity scandal. I attached the folder of Mom's emails complete with the donor list. The second email went to my father's business partners titled Falsified Donations, Evidence Attached. The third was simpler. It went to Clara's new in-laws with a link to her message threads and the bachelor party photos. I didn't add commentary. The files would speak for themselves. I typed a single sentence at the end of each, truth doesn't bruise. It reveals. My finger hovered over the send button, then stopped. No, not yet. Timing mattered. I opened the scheduler and set them all for 900 a.m., the same time the newlyweds would wake up for their brunch farewell. My mother would be arranging leftover flowers for the church, my father would be on his phone checking news headlines, and I'd be gone. I saved everything one last time and shut the laptop. In the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection again. The bruise on my cheek had deepened to a stormy purple, the cut along my jaw still raw. For the first time, I didn't flinch. It wasn't something to hide anymore. It was evidence, the same as the files, the same as their voices on the recordings I'd kept. Proof that I had been here, that I had survived them. I opened the window and let the cold air rush in, washing the smell of them out of the room. Somewhere downstairs, a champagne glass rolled off the counter and shattered. I didn't move to clean it. I just listened to the sound fade one shard at a time. Evidence, I thought, never blinks. Dawn slipped through the blinds, thin and silver. I hadn't slept. My body ached, but my mind felt precise, almost mathematical. The laptop sat closed on the desk like a loaded weapon. Downstairs, the first sounds of movement began: the coffee grinder, the soft hum of my mother's voice rehearsing pleasantries for the brunch. They were already rewriting the story again. I packed quietly the hard drive, the phone, a small leather journal that still smelled of dust and ink. I wrapped a scarf around my face, not to hide this time, but to protect the healing skin from the cold. At 6:30, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my planner. I wrote one word at the top of a blank page: justice. Under it, I listed 3 bullet points: expose, proof, exit. I wasn't going to beg for apologies or revenge through chaos. I wanted consequences carved into daylight. I began preparing the drops. For the local newspaper, I attached a short statement: all documents verified. Sources trace back to the Carter Foundation. Public has the right to know. For my father's partners, I added a single line beneath the spreadsheets: every false donation you signed off is now traceable. For my sister's in-laws, I left the evidence of her messages without commentary, only the timestamp of the wedding night. I scheduled each email for 900 a.m. sharp. The system gave me confirmation pings, tiny chimes of inevitability. Still, I wasn't finished. I wanted a final act, a mirror, not a bomb. I printed 3 envelopes and labeled them by hand: Richard, Elaine, Clara. Inside each, I placed a photograph of myself from years ago, college graduation, the only day I remembered them looking proud. On the back of each photo, I wrote in calm ink: you taught me image is everything. I'm just returning it to you. I left the envelopes on the kitchen table beside the half-empty bottle of champagne they had toasted with. At 7:30, the sky outside turned the color of bruised lavender. I made coffee, drank it black, and listened to the slow waking of the house. My father's phone buzzed repeatedly, congratulations from colleagues, a reminder of his interview with the local paper. He loved publicity. It would be poetic that his undoing arrived through the same channel. My mother came down in a robe, humming, eyes swollen from last night's drinking. She saw me and froze. "You're still here?" she asked. Her voice carried the faint tremor of guilt disguised as annoyance. "Leaving soon," I said evenly. She poured herself a glass of water. "Good. Clara and Evan are coming by for brunch. Try not to make it uncomfortable." "I won't," I said and meant it. I was beyond discomfort now. She walked past me toward the counter, glanced at the envelopes but didn't open them. She assumed they were thank you notes. When she turned her back, I looked at her reflection in the window. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like a witness standing at a crime scene preserved in glass. At 8:15, I stepped outside. The morning air burned with frost, each breath visible. Across the street, the neighbor's dog barked once sharp and distant. I walked to the bus stop with my bag slung over my shoulder and the drive in my coat pocket. My hands were steady. Every street lamp flickered pale gold like the world was holding its breath. I reached into my pocket and felt the vibration of my phone, a reminder. Scheduled emails, 45 minutes remaining. My thumb hovered over cancel, then dropped away. No, they had chosen the lie. I was choosing the truth. Back at the house, through the open curtains, I could see them gathering at the breakfast table. Clara wore her new diamond ring, flashing it toward the sunlight. My father raised a toast again, probably to new beginnings. My mother smiled the same polished smile she had practiced for decades. They looked so sure of themselves, so permanent. I whispered to no one, "You built your kingdom on glass." At 8:59, the bus arrived. I boarded, sat near the back, and watched the house shrink in the distance. 1 minute later, my phone buzzed 3 times, the confirmation pings. Sent, sent, sent. Inside that quiet vibration was years of erased truth resurfacing. By the time they realized I would be miles away, just another commuter in the morning crowd. I rested my head against the cold window. The city skyline shimmered ahead, and for the first time, the reflection looking back at me didn't seem broken. It looked deliberate. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the world began to move. I was still on the bus crossing the river when the first notification buzzed against my palm. Then another, then another. Dozens, each one marked delivered. I stared out the window as the town unfurled below me, calm and unsuspecting, while chaos quietly rooted itself in my parents' house. From my seat, I could imagine the moment it started, my father's phone lighting up beside his plate, my mother's tablet chiming with messages, Clara's giggling cut short by a single horrified gasp. The bus turned onto Main Street just as the first ripple reached the surface. A news alert blinked on the screen at the front: local businessman under investigation for charity fraud. My father's name wasn't there yet, but it would be. I knew the pattern: editors confirming sources, publicists panicking, assistants calling lawyers. I got off at the next stop outside the old public library where I used to work. The building looked smaller than I remembered, but the smell paper dust rain wrapped around me like something solid. I stepped inside, logged onto one of the public computers, and opened the local news site. The headline had already updated: documents leak alleges misuse of donations by Carter Family Foundation. Beneath it, a photo of my father shaking hands with a mayor, my mother in the background smiling like a saint. The irony burned cold. I scrolled through the article. They had printed the screenshots exactly as I sent them: her forged letters, his hidden transfers, the donor list. One line read, "Sources close to the family claim the couple's eldest daughter was unaware of the misappropriation." That was me, unaware, invisible. The ghost they'd used as camouflage. I almost laughed. At home, it must have been unraveling. My father's clients were meticulous men. Reputation meant everything. They'd be forwarding that article in their group chat before coffee went cold. I opened my email and watched the inbox flood: dozens of out of office, some auto replies, but others sharp and urgent. One from an anonymous address read, "We've been waiting for this. Thank you." Another from the editor, "Can you verify authorship? We're running this as front page." I didn't reply. I just closed the tab. At 9:37, my phone buzzed again. Clara's number flashing. I let it ring. Then came another call, this time from Mom. Then Dad. I silenced them all. When I finally looked down, I saw their text previews stacked like dominoes. Dad. "What did you do, Mom?" "Naomi, answer me right now. Clara. You've ruined everything." I put the phone face down on the desk and stared out at the gray street. By 10 Tuzrod, the second email had detonated. I checked the business forum where Dad's partners posted their press releases. One thread already read, "Richard Carter's contracts frozen pending audit." Dozens of comments followed, some outraged, some gleeful. A woman with the username DonorTruth had attached a PDF, one of the same invoices I'd sent. "This looks bad," someone replied. Another answered, "He's finished." I pictured the breakfast table, my mother clutching her pearls, my father pacing, Clara crying about what people will think. I didn't feel triumph, just release. Outside, the clouds had started to break. I walked down the steps and crossed to the coffee shop across the street. The barista, a quiet kid with messy hair, gave me a nod of recognition. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window, phone still buzzing in my bag. I didn't check it until 10:22. When I did, my hands went still. There it was, the third and final domino. A message from Clara's husband's family group chat. Someone had forwarded my link. "We need to talk. Now." I scrolled down screenshots of her messages with the wedding planner, the late-night photos, the laughter emojis. Someone had reacted with a broken heart, another with a question mark. The honeymoon, I knew, would never happen. For a long moment, I sat motionless, coffee cooling beside me, the hum of the cafe drowning out the noise in my chest. I had expected anger from them, maybe confrontation. What I hadn't expected was the quiet clarity that followed. My reflection in the window showed me a woman I barely recognized, bruised, yes, but steady. My mother used to say, "The truth always ruins everything." She was wrong. The truth doesn't ruin, it reveals. By noon, my father's photo appeared on another news site, Carter Foundation under federal review. A neighbor had given a statement. They always seemed perfect. I guess you never really know. I smiled faintly. That was the point. The last message that came was from an unlisted number. 5 words. "You think this fixes anything?" I didn't reply immediately. I let the question sit on the screen, heavy and familiar. Then slowly I typed back, "No. It exposes what was never whole." I turned off the phone. The cafe light caught at the window just right, reflecting my face against the street outside, a faint shimmer like glass after rain. Somewhere across town, the world they'd built was cracking. I gathered my things and walked out into the clean, cold air. By evening, the town was already whispering. The Carters weren't just a family anymore, they were a headline. Every few hours, a new piece dropped online, a donor statement, a police quote, a neighbor interview. My father's face appeared on every screen, his jaw tight, his practiced smile gone. The man who once lectured me about dignity now had reporters parked in his driveway. At 5:14 p.m., a news anchor used the phrase, "pattern of coercion and deception." I couldn't have described it better myself. I didn't go home. I found a cheap motel off Route 7, a place with humming fluorescent lights, and a vending machine that only took quarters. The room smelled of detergent and old air, but it was mine. No footsteps outside my door. No mirrors I didn't choose. I sat on the bed with the lamp turned low and listened to the rain hitting the window. Each drop sounded like punctuation. Around 6, the phone started buzzing again. This time, the messages were different. My aunt. "Tell me this isn't true." A former teacher, I always knew something was off about them. Even Clara's best friend texted, "You didn't deserve any of it." Then finally the call I knew would come. "Mom." I let it ring out twice before answering. "Naomi." Her voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked out the window where the rain streaked down like slow tears. "Yes," I said. "I told the truth." She let out a bitter laugh. "You've destroyed your father's career, our name, your sister's marriage." "No, Mom," I cut in quietly. "You did that. I just turned on the light." There was silence, then a sound like a broken breath. "You think you're innocent?" she hissed. "You're nothing without us." I hung up. 10 minutes later, the phone lit up again. Dad's turn. His message was simple. "You're not part of this family anymore." I stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted them. That was the point. By midnight, the local news confirmed the investigation had gone federal. The charity accounts were frozen, the house placed under audit. The same chandelier that had sparkled above Clara's wedding rehearsal now hung over empty rooms filled with reporters and inventory checklists. I imagined Mom pacing, muttering prayers that sounded more like curses. I imagined Clara scrolling through her messages, realizing the comments were turned off on every post she'd ever made. I didn't feel glee, just an exhausted kind of quiet. Justice isn't loud. It's the sound of people forced to face themselves. The next morning, I bought a newspaper from the corner stand. The headline read, "Carter Foundation exposed federal audit underway." Beneath it, a smaller line, "Family declines comment." I folded it neatly and placed it beside my coffee. My reflection in the motel mirror caught my eye. The swelling had started to fade. The bruise was turning yellow at the edges. Healing, I thought, looks like evidence softening. At noon, another message came, this one from Clara. "I hope you're happy." I typed back slowly. "Happiness isn't watching you fall. It's knowing you can't hurt me anymore." I hit send and turned the phone face down. The rain stopped. Outside, the clouds were lifting, leaving streaks of light across the wet pavement. I sat for a long while, listening to the hum of the motel heater, feeling the first thin trace of peace settle in. They had silenced me for years. Now the world had found its own voice. For the first time in my life, their noise wasn't louder than my truth. Weeks passed before I stopped checking headlines every morning. The investigation consumed them auditors, lawyers, the endless parade of faces that used to smile at my parents' fundraisers now avoiding the cameras. Their house was quiet, curtains drawn the same house where they once hosted galas and Christmas parties. People said my mother had a breakdown during one of the questioning sessions that my father fired 3 attorneys in a week. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't need it. Justice wasn't about watching them collapse. It was about finally breathing without permission. I found work in a small town 2 hours away, a quiet place where no one recognized my last name. The library there was hiring, and the manager, an older woman named Clara Bellamy. Coincidence so strange it felt cosmic, didn't ask about my scars. She only asked if I liked books and quiet mornings. "Those I can handle," I said, and she smiled. The apartment above the bakery across the street became home. It smelled like yeast and cinnamon. My landlord, a widow named Mrs. Ames, left flowers by the door every Sunday. The first night I sat on the floor with a blanket, a thrift store lamp, and a mug of instant coffee, feeling the smallest spark of safety I'd known in years. Some mornings I walked to the river. The reflection of sunlight on the water reminded me of glass. The same glass that once drew blood now looked like grace. The bruise had faded by then, leaving a pale, thin scar tracing the edge of my cheekbone. People stared, sometimes curious but polite. I didn't hide it. It wasn't a flaw anymore. It was a signature. My phone stayed mostly silent, except for one message from an unknown number a month later. "They're selling the house." I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on learning small joys, again how to bake without measuring, how to laugh without apology, how to feel tired from something other than fear. I volunteered at the town's reading club for kids. One afternoon, a boy named Theo asked about the mark on my face. I told him it's a map. It reminds me where not to go again. He nodded like that made sense, then handed me a drawing of a sun with a smile. "You should keep this," he said. I did. I pinned it above my desk. Months later, Clara Bellamy offered me a partnership at the library cafe. "You organize, you design, you care," she said simply. I used the savings from selling what little I'd taken from home and rented the empty storefront next door. We opened it under a new name, the Glass Room Cafe. The first morning we unlocked the doors, the air smelled of fresh paint and hope. Customers trickled in, older couples, college students, locals on their lunch breaks. The walls were pale blue. The tables mismatched the shelves lined with books people could borrow or leave behind. In the corner, I hung a framed photo not of my family, but of the lake at dawn, the water still reflecting everything and nothing. Business was small but steady. Every time someone thanked me for the coffee or complimented the decor, I felt a quiet pride. I had built something no one could steal or rewrite. Then one winter afternoon, an envelope appeared in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph my parents sitting in their half-empty living room, auction signs visible through the window. Clara, gaunt and pale, perched beside them. Across the photo in my mother's handwriting were the words, "Are you happy now?" I stared at it for a long time. Then I pinned it to the bulletin board behind the counter beside Theo's drawing of the sun. Not out of cruelty, but as a reminder. Happiness wasn't their collapse, it was my continuation. Sometimes after closing, I sat on the porch steps with Clara Bellamy sharing tea as the streetlights flickered on. One night she asked softly, "Do you ever think you went too far?" I looked at the glowing windows of the cafe, the laughter inside the calm that had replaced the panic. "No," I said. "I think I finally went far enough." She smiled. "Good. Just don't live there too long. Even justice loses its shine if you stare at it." Her words stayed with me. Justice had been my survival, but peace, that was the future. A year later, the Glassroom Cafe hosted its first art night. Local painters, writers, musicians filled the space. I stood behind the counter, watching strangers laugh under the same light that once terrified me. A reporter covering the event asked about the name. "Because glass can break," I told her, "but when it's clean, it reflects the truth." That night, as I locked up the wind, rattled the windows gently. I caught my reflection in the glass door, strong, scarred, alive. For the first time, I whispered thank you not to them, but to the version of me who had survived long enough to become this one. A full year later, autumn returned to the same shade of gold it had been the night before Clara's wedding. The air carried that same dry chill, the kind that reminded me of endings disguised as beginnings. The cafe had grown busier, locals coming for comfort, travelers for the quiet. Every morning I polished the windows until they caught the sunlight just right. People said the place felt peaceful, though none of them knew why the light meant so much to me. One afternoon just before closing, a courier dropped off a small box. No sender listed. Inside was another photograph. It was my parents' house, or what used to be. The paint had peeled, the porch sagged, and the yard that once hosted perfect garden parties was overgrown with weeds. My father stood on the porch in a worn jacket, staring at the camera with hollow eyes. My mother sat beside him, her face thinner, her smile gone. Clara was nowhere in sight. On the back of the photo, in my father's handwriting this time, were the words, "We lost everything. Are you proud?" I held the picture for a long moment. Then I turned it over and looked again at their faces, the same people who had once raised glasses over my blood and called it perfection. "No," I whispered. "Not proud. Free." I pinned the photograph beside the first one they'd sent beneath Theo's sun drawing and a note from a regular customer that read, "Your cafe makes my mornings better." The board had become its own mirror, a collage of what truth leaves behind when lies collapse. That evening, as the last customers left the cafe, emptied into silence. The setting sun reached across the counter and struck the glass door. For a moment, everything shimmered, my reflection, the light, the faint scar along my cheekbone. It didn't bother me anymore. It felt like part of the architecture now, the final line in a design I hadn't planned but somehow built. I walked outside, locked the door, and turned toward the window. Inside, the empty tables glowed amber. I could see myself standing there, framed by the same light that once exposed every flaw. Only now it reflected something else, endurance, grace. A woman who had learned that breaking doesn't always mean ending. "They used to toast to perfection," I murmured. "Now they drink to memory." I smiled, small but real. "And I drink to truth." The wind brushed against the window, scattering the last leaves across the street. The light dimmed, and in the darkened glass my reflection remained steady, scarred, unafraid. The glass hadn't betrayed me after all. It had shown me the truth, and this time I was the one holding it steady. Some nights when the cafe was closed and the town had gone still, I would linger by the window and think about how everything began, with laughter, with glass, with blood. I used to wonder whether justice had really been served, or if I had simply traded one silence for another. But over time, I realized that what mattered wasn't their punishment, it was my peace. People came and went through the Glassroom Cafe every day. Some sat quietly with coffee, others brought stories of their own about betrayal, survival, rebuilding. They didn't know mine, not the details, but they felt it. You can always sense when a space was built from truth. Sometimes an older woman would pause by the counter and say, "It's beautiful here. You must have gone through a lot to make something this calm." I always smiled and replied, "Calm doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from storms." The scar on my face had faded to the faint color of pearl, catching the light only at certain angles. Children sometimes asked about it. Adults were too polite. I told the kids the same thing every time. It's a mark from when the truth came through. They'd laugh, not understanding. But someday, maybe they would. A journalist once returned to do a feature on small-town businesses that rose from hardship. She asked, "If you could say one thing to your family now, what would it be?" I thought for a long time before answering. "Thank you," I said finally. Because without them, I wouldn't have learned that survival isn't just living, it's living differently. That quote ended up printed beneath my photo in the article. I kept the clipping near the register, not for pride, for reminder. And so, life went on. The truth had cost me everything I once thought mattered. Family, reputation, belonging, but it had given me something stronger, self-ownership. The kind no one can bruise or rewrite. On quiet evenings, I locked the door, wiped down the tables, and turned off the lights one by one. Each glass surface reflected back a little of the past, but it didn't hurt anymore. It just shimmered. If you're listening, and you've ever been trapped in a house built on lies, I'll tell you this: you can leave. The walls don't own you. The truth might break the glass, but it also lets the light in. Tell me what truth set you free.